Hey everybody, and welcome back to another Yu-Gi-Oh video. In today's video we are going to be starting a semi-new segment. I guess I'm just going to put this into a new category of its own, but we are going to be talking ban list. Now with the looming 2020 December ban list right around the corner here, I thought I would give my thoughts on the list, what I'd like to see banned, what I would like to see limited, what I would like to see unbanned. Going through the cards on the list, I didn't really see anything that I think would be good semi-limited, so I do just kind of have that area of the ban list blank for the most part. But I thought I would delve in a little bit. I do play meta decks and I do play at locals, so I definitely have kind of a pretty decent understanding of the current meta and what is played a lot, problem cards, things that could probably come off the list to maybe not necessarily balance out the format, but bring a little bit more variety to your locals scene and whatnot. So let's go ahead and just jump right into it with what I think needs to be banned in Yu-Gi-Oh currently. So we really only have two main deck cards I feel like that really need to be kind of touched here, and that would be Dragonbuster Destruction Sword and Smoke Grenade of the Thief. Now, Dragonbuster Destruction Sword needs to go. A lot of people would argue that Union Carrier is the card that enables this to be broken, but Union Carrier has a lot of utility outside in different kind of non-meta decks, maybe rogue decks, if you can say that. And Dragonbuster itself is the actual card that just locks you out of your extra deck. In and of itself, Union Carrier doesn't do that in every single deck, so it's not really enabling broken plays, let's say like an ABC or, any other deck that can really play it. But every time that you see it used in like a dark deck, they're using it to equip Dragonbuster to one of your dark monsters, give it the 1000 attack boost, and then lock your opponent out of the extra deck. Now this wouldn't be a huge issue if main decks played a lot of like back row removal, but since you don't see a lot of decks in the current meta main decking cards like Cosmic Cyclone or Twin Twister or even Lightning Storm, you might see like Feather Duster in some zoo lists, and you also might see Cosmic Cyclone in some zoo lists, but it's not like every deck has to play it, so every deck doesn't have a main deck out to Dragonbuster Destruction Sword. If you happen to lose the die roll and don't really have any interaction on your opponent's turn, so you're liking hand traps in your opening hand, and they're able to just combo off, there are a lot of decks that can just pump out this card, which is basically a free win if you play no back row removal. It just doesn't seem like a fair card that really promotes player interaction. It just says, well, you can't access your extra deck, so I guess you're just not going to be able to play this turn, because every deck in the format that's meta, relevant or can be extremely competitive has to rely on their extra deck in some aspect to deal damage, push through and break boards, and hopefully eventually win that match. So moving on here, we have Smoke Grenade of the Thief, and this card is one that I debated putting on here. I know a lot of people have a lot of strong opinions on Smoke Grenade because it allows your opponent to look at your hand, rip a card out of it, and in tandem with other cards like being able to make Omega, it's ripping like a second card out of your hand. And hand knowledge is just so important in the game, because if you know what your opponent's playing with, you know what to negate. And I definitely think now, looking back on it, I need this card to be banned. It's just ridiculously powerful. So basically the whole concept here is that Infernoble plays this card because they can equip it on the end phase to, I think it's Charles is their big synchro monster, and then Charles' effect that when something is equipped to it, it can pop one card on the field. So it pops Smoke Grenade of the Time Thief, lets you look at your opponent's hand, rips a card out of it. So you have hand knowledge. Most likely you're ending on, like Savage Herald, Charles, which can then pop another card, because usually you have the level 5 Seeker in the grave that can re-equip itself. Then Charles gets a pop on the next turn. That combo in and of itself is just kind of insane. And the fact that having hand knowledge of your opponent is just so powerful right now, it really needs to go. It's not that it promotes like an unhealthy game state or anything like that. It's not like Mystic Mine or Dragonbuster where your opponent can't play, but it's just the fact that it gains you so much knowledge in the game that pretty much just tells you and your opponent, hey, I'm just going to be negating these cards out of your hand. I know you can't play after that. We may as well go to game 2. And that in and of itself, I think, just isn't really fun. Moving on to the extra deck here, we have Utopic Zexel, and I'm also going to include Shrieking of All Calamities in this because they basically do the exact same thing. So I think Utopic Zexel is a little bit not as bad as VFD is, which is True King of All Calamities. strictly because you have to play a specific engine and a specific number of extra deck cards to utilize this, but this is still unhealthy. It does promote a very, what I think is like an unhealthy play style where you just sit on a card that says, hey, your opponent can't play, and it's not that it just gets like one use out of it, it gets multiple uses. You usually make it with, well, you have to make it with 3 number exceeds monsters with the same rank. So you play the Numeron cards, you summon the 3 Numeron cards off of Numeron Call-In and Numeron Network, and then you just overlay into this. So that's 4 summons, it plays around Nibiru. On your turn, your opponent can just quick effect detach a material and activate this effect. Your opponent just can't activate cards for the rest of the turn. It is insane. And it does gain 1,000 attack per material that it has, so even after it activates its effect once, it's still a 2k, which most people don't play summons that can just get over that without having to like activate some sort of effect. In and of itself, it just puts your opponent 2 turns ahead, which is inherently pretty broken. Same thing with VFD. While VFD only requires 2 level 9s, it can actually, you can do more than 2 level 9s. It's actually 2+, which a lot of people don't seem to pay a lot of attention to. It doesn't pop up very often, but you know, if you're playing some weird like turbo level 9 strategy, this could be relevant. But VFD basically does the same thing, where you detach 1 material from this card, declare 1 attribute. This turn, all face-up monsters on the field become that attribute. Also, all monsters in your opponent's possession with that attribute cannot activate their effects or attack. And that does say in your opponent's possession. So that does count hand, and that does count grave. Anything like on the field and in the hand and in the graveyard that your opponent has is considered in their possession. Now this comes up sometimes when cards say like when this card in your possession leaves the field. So like Beatrice, Lady of Eternal, if that card is Solemn Strike, it still gets its effect because the card is still in your possession because it's in like your deck, extra deck, hand, field, grave. Everything there is considered in your possession. So very careful to note that this does also count hand and grave. So basically, you know, both of these cards just enable your opponent to not be able to play for multiple turns. I know the argument here is like, well, your opponent could have impermanence, your opponent could have gamma, but good players will wait for your opponent to start playing cards and then activate this, burning more resources out of your opponent than what, you know, would normally happen if you just activated this like in the draw phase or on the standby or, you know, in main phase 1. It leaves you basically protected from gamma and impermanence, especially if your opponent puts like a monster on board, you're protected from both. If your opponent plays like a spell card, you can chain this, just hope your opponent doesn't also have gamma. You can also chain it to infinite impermanence, so if they just like shotgun an imperm, you could just chain to that, which, you know, leaves you kind of non-susceptible to like another impermanence because your opponent just can't slap a second copy down while the chain's resolving. It's just very unhealthy to not be able to, you know, to play the game, and that's what these 2 cards enable. Third here, we have Linkross. Now, a lot of people would say that instead of Linkross, we should just ban Needle Fiber because Needle Fiber is the real problem bringing out the tuner. I think Needle Fiber is fine in and of itself because it can really make non-viable or tier 2 decks playable by getting like engine pieces out of their deck that they need to kind of like combo off with. The big problem here is that Linkross enables cards like Metal Marcher to be really good, and without Linkross, you're not summoning your 2 tokens, it's not letting you take a level 2 tuner and a token into Metal Marcher, it's not letting Metal Marcher revive, so I think Linkross is like the linchpin here. Most of the time, if you stop your opponent's Linkross play after they use their copy of Needle Fiber to, or Halka Fibrex to go into Linkross, they just don't have a lot of follow-up plays unless they have more extenders in hand. Unfortunately, Linkross is just kind of like that weird 1-card link combo that just lets many different decks do insane things. Notably, decks like Infernoble and Dragon Link are the 2 big ones right now, but there's a lot of other decks that utilize this broken strategy. Fourth here, we have Mecha Phantom Beast Aurora Dawn, which I'll just call Aurora Dawn from this point on. This card, I wasn't sure if I was going to put it on here or not, but I was kind of going through the combos with Needle Fiber and bringing out like a, you know, any machine tuner. You can still go into Mecha Phantom Beast, get your 3 tokens, tribute 2 monsters, bring out another Mecha Phantom Beast tuner, and make plays from there. I'm not saying that it's inherently broken, but I can see this being a problem card in the future if other things don't get touched as well. You know, Linkross might not get banned, Aurora Dawn also might not get banned, but some of these have to go in whatever capacity, you know, Konami sees fit. But this is still a problem card, and I think if it's not bad now, it could be bad in the future. and since Konami does like to kind of future-proof their ban lists, kind of harkening back to the most, the previous one that we had, not the current one, but the one before this, where they semi-limited Toad and ABC Buster Dragon, they were definitely kind of like future-proofing those decks, and they might do the exact same thing here. Lastly here, the other card that I want banned would be Guard Dragon LP, and the only reason why I want this card banned is because Dragon decks in and of themselves are inherently strong. Most Dragon effects are just kind of busted, and the fact that we're getting more Dragoonity support doesn't really do this card any favors. This card can just basically Rhoda and special summon any Dragon card from the deck. I just can't believe this card hadn't been hit before. We have already seen one Guard Dragon hit, and I think this one needs to go also. Definitely, the Dragon Link extra deck monster before this did deserve the hit. It was definitely overpowered. It was insane being able to kind of just get out a Dragon extra deck monster and throw it on the board. But LP pretty much does the same thing just for your deck, and I don't see any reason why this card should be staying at more than anything banned. So let's move on to our next list here. That'll be cards that I think can come to 1. I definitely think, or cards that I think need to go to 1. We're just gonna delete this here. Oops. I think Scarlet Sanguine needs to go to 1 strictly because the Eldritch engine's so powerful already. It has Aurora in the form of Cursed Eldland. All the traps basically replace themselves in the end phase. And the only way to make the Golden Lance trap cards dead is by not having a Golden Lord unfield. And the fact that you can just keep summoning and start recycling multiple copies from your deck for basically free. I mean, it's almost more than free because you're never really losing card advantage. And when you stop losing card advantage, you're just like, it's like imagining just like Pot of Greeting every turn and getting 2 trap cards. It's kind of insane. So I think this needs to go to 1 just to create a more kind of balanced Eldritch engine, especially since you see a lot of Eldritch being splashed in meta decks like Zoo currently. It would just be pretty healthy for the game if this card went to 1. Next, I definitely think that we can have Masterpiece at multiples, or not multiples, but at 1 at least. I've been a proponent of this card coming back to 1 for a while, and while I don't really like True Draco as a deck, I don't necessarily think that playstyle is unhealthy. It does play Floodgates, but you also interact a lot with your opponent using like the True Draco spells and traps, and it really kind of makes your opponent have to think about their, 1-for-1 interactions. If this card came back and we started seeing a lot more True Draco in the metal, in the meta, not in the metal, I think we would see different types of like deck building strategies with maybe like a little bit more back row removal. You might see, more going second decks with Lightning Storm and stuff, just kind of mass removal cards. That would be really neat to see. I definitely think Draco's kind of like a strap on the helmet type deck, as it is right now, but having 1 Masterpiece just makes the deck a little more interactive, kind of makes your opponent think a little bit more about what they're going to have to do, and I definitely can see this coming back to 1. Third here, I think we have one of the biggest problem cards in the meta, and that's Miscellaneousaurus. I'm not sure why Konami thought it was smart to put this card to 3. It is just absolutely ridiculous. It takes away any ability for you to interact with your opponent on their turn 1 because all of their dinosaur monsters are just unaffected by card effects. Now, the only thing that really does kind of skirt around this are continuous effects. So that would be effects like Skill Drain, the Phantom Knight's Fog Blade, things that have just lingering effects that kind of blanket and negate the board. But, outside of Phantom Knights and, kind of like back row strategy decks, you're not going to really be seeing those cards used a lot. So they're not a huge threat to the Dino deck as a whole. This card just adds blanket protection so your cards cannot be ashed or imperned. You can't just interact with your opponent's monsters at all in the main phase 1. This basically allows them to just combo off and end on their negates. They have a giant Tyranno that can just book your monsters and you can't do anything about it. It's very unhealthy, and I think this card needs to go to 1. I do think it needs to be legal. I don't think it needs to be banned, and I think people are kind of silly for wanting it banned because dinos do still need like a little bit of power or additional power outside of just being able to summon Archosaur and pop a baby. Miscellaneousaurus does add that extra layer of like playability to the deck, but it shouldn't be at multiple copies, especially when we still have 3 Fossil Dig and 3 Oviraptor. And who knows, Konami might take a page out of their OCG ban list to put Oviraptor, maybe at 2 or at 1. We never really know. I don't personally think Oviraptor needs to get hit, but I think Miscellaneousaurus in its place is the one that should take a hit. Lastly, here we have Thunder Dragon Colossus. I think my opinions on this are pretty much the same as why I think Masterpiece can go back to 1. I don't think Thunder Dragon in and of itself right now is inherently broken. I know we do have cards like Verte Anaconda now that lends to a more fusion type strategy where you can actually just send the Thunder Dragon fusion spell from the deck to the graveyard, fusion summon that way. But I don't think like a single copy of Colossus would be super bad right now. I mean, we're seeing decks like Dragon Link and Infernoble, and while Infernoble does search a lot, it can still do a lot without having to search. You also see Dinos, which, answer Thunder Dragon pretty well. Zoo can still answer it really well because you can just like equip a Whiptail and banish the monster. It's not too terrible, and I think just having it at 1 wouldn't create a lot of problems, especially if like Guard Dragon LP's banned. We already have the Link 2 Guard Dragon banned, so it's not like they're going to be doing ridiculous stuff like they used to back when the Thunder Dragon deck was really meta, so I think it's safe to come back at 1. I definitely don't think it should be back at multiples, because being able to just do this every single turn kind of makes it hard for your opponent to, play past turn 1, but being able to get over 1, I think for most decks right now, isn't too much of a challenge. So now we have cards that I think should go back to 3. Like I said earlier in the video, I don't really have any cards I think should be semi-limited. I think having cards mandatory at 2 is a little ridiculous. So cards like Graph and Seer that are currently at 2, I think could probably come back at 3 and they'd be fine. We're not really seeing BA do much right now, and even in like BA PK decks, people are still just playing 1 Graph and 1 Seer, so it could potentially come back to 3. I, don't think it's imperative that it does, but I don't think it would be harmful, if they did. I just don't think that putting anything to 2 currently is needed. So, talking about cards that need to come off the list, I think Trickstar Light Stage could definitely come off the list. We don't see like the Trickstar Sky Striker deck anymore with Engage banned. Definitely Engage is a card that shouldn't come off the list. I know a couple of people, like in Simo's video, he talked about the card coming back. I've definitely seen different other Yu-Gi tubers saying that, Engage can come back to 1 or multiples. Definitely don't think that's the case, but there's no reason for Trickstar Light Stage right now to be at 1. We don't see the unique Orcus strategy anymore that abuses Light Stage. I know a lot of people say, well, Light Stage is like a 1-card Verte Anaconda, and that's true, but I don't think, Verte Anaconda or Dragoon in and of itself are hard cards to get over. Same thing as like Masterpiece and Colossus. A lot of decks can still answer that with their main deck, and it's not that big of a problem. If your deck can't get over it, because you bricked or whatever, that's not a reason to like want the card banned. Maybe you just need to go back to deck building and consider playing cards in the main deck that can help you get over problem cards. So if your deck just hard loses to Dragoon, maybe main deck, Forbidden Droplets or something like that. And, just consider your options. See if it's easier to get over, with like a change in your deck. But in and of itself, this card can definitely come back to 3. It's a good card. Trickstars would probably be played again in like a tier 2 capacity. I would definitely like to play it again. I think it has some pretty neat interactions, but the fact that its main searcher is at 1 doesn't do the deck any favors. Second off, here we have Called by the Grave. This is just a hit that I didn't really understand in the first place. I can't really wrap my mind around why this card would have been put to 1. A lot of decks didn't even play this card in multiples. They didn't play it at all, so putting it to 1 just didn't seem right. I mean, there was no real rhyme or reason why Konami needed to do it, which is why I think the card can come back to 3. They may have done it for monetary purposes because we probably should be getting that Designator card soon, which is just effectively another copy of Called by the Grave. But we don't have it yet, and it's been quite a while since this card got put to 1. I think it needs to come back to 3. There's really no reason for it to be at 1. It just doesn't make any sense. Going to the extra here, we have ABC Buster Dragon. Now, in this most previous list, like the current list that we have now, we saw Buster Dragon and Toad coming back to 2. I'm not really sure why Toad was ever put to 1, and I don't know why this just didn't go right back to 3. It's a little bit over my head. You don't see a lot of paleo strategies or, Mermail decks popping up in the meta currently. They can really make Toad. Maybe Konami knows something that we don't. I just think this card should have never been put to 1 in the first place. I can see why Buster Dragon, or Dragonbuster here, was put to 1. It was a preemptive hit on Konami's part because we still had Jet Synchron, and it made ABC kind of a broken deck at the time. Then you put it to 2. Deck still hasn't seen a lot of play. There's maybe a couple people on Dueling Book that I see played here and there, but it's never really considered super strong. I think the card could just come back to 3, like, give ABC a little bit of a boost, clear up their extra deck a little bit, just let them make this card consistently without having to worry about recycling. I just really don't see any reason why this card should be, limited in any capacity. These two could definitely come back to 3, and I wouldn't have any issues with it. Toad, you know, Toad can recycle itself, so even being at 1, it wasn't super terrible. Being at 2, it's also not terrible, but I just don't see any decks playing this currently. Not even really on the ladder have I faced anything that makes Toad. Not threatening in the least bit. You know, even most decks that would play Bahamut Shark into Toad would just play 1 Toad and 1 Bahamut Shark anyway, so it could definitely come back off the list. I don't think it'll be meta impactful if it does. I just think it's kind of ridiculous for it to be here. So I think that about wraps it up. These are what I think should be changes to the next Forbidden Limited list here coming in December. I'm not really sure when we're going to be getting the list. Hopefully in the next couple weeks, I would like to see it. It'll be nice now that a lot of people are kind of starting to do, you know, remote duels a little more religiously than they were before. And now that some locals are back open, yeah, I think it would be a great change of pace. So thank you guys for watching this video. I would like to hear your comments and what you would like to see on the list as well down in the comments below. If you'd please ring the notification bell so you get notifications whenever I post. And yeah, I will see you guys next time.